Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. Agentic automation isn't just the next step in automation, it's the future of how work gets done. By enabling intelligent, autonomous agents to take action, adapt, and collaborate, organizations are unlocking new levels of productivity, growth, and customer delight. Join us as we explore how agentic automation is reshaping work for the better, for customers, employees, shareholders, and most importantly, you. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. I'm your host, Michael Marchuk, and today we have two returning guests, John Ballone and Jeremy Rossi, who are within SS&C. We've had some really interesting conversations in the past and looking forward to this one again, too. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello. Again.
How's it going? Welcome back. I feel like I should just introduce you now, because 2 times?
Exactly. You guys keep coming back, which is great. I'm glad you keep coming back because I love your insights on things. So we're just going to jump right in here. So folks who are aware probably know a lot about this, but a lot of people are probably still in that middle section, the gray area. You talk about MCP, and it's a term that we're starting to hear a lot more and more of. Can you break down what it actually means and why it matters for developers and builders and businesses even that are using this?
I want to go because I want to say MCP's dying already, but that's not. It's just because the pace of the technology stack is going so fast. So MCP is a way for integrating in the chat, for like an LLM to integrate and call tools. It's a defined way for it to select a tool, call out to those tools and make use of them and get them as a part of a response. It's basically it's a RPC system for a prompt-based LLM. But the interesting part about it is that you make those tools available to an LLM, and then it will select which tool to use to try to get to the outcome. So you can sit there and say like, hey, here's a connection to GitHub, here's a connection to Salesforce, and here's a connection to my internal email system. Create me an email for every single person that's contributed code to my open source project. That would mean it would select and it would ignore Salesforce. It would select GitHub, find the projects you have access to, find the people, and then open up a selection and create emails and send it to them. That is how MCP gets used. It's often referred to as the USB of protocols for LLMs, but it is exactly as secure and safe as USB. Just like all the government ports and every single large organization, some hot glued it closed, some turned it off via software. It's about as secure. And the technology stack over the last couple of years has changed. Well, last couple of months has started to add that security on top of it now. But there's a lot more coming. But the interesting tidbit, the thing that people are finding is that MCP is bloated. It is it's based on JSON RPC. So it means it's easy to parse. LLMs know how to do it really well. But JSON RPC is very verbose, and it means that the response that you get back is extremely large, and it destroys your context. It means a good example of this is the GitHub of MCP plugin is 229K in context just by making it available. And then most responses are bigger than Sonnet can handle at 200K. So like you get to this point where the tool is already being so large that you have to do selections, you have to do very specific tools. So what we're seeing is something that Cloudflare and Anthropic are starting to do is to not use MCP by default, but they're using markdown files in things that are called skills. And those skills are a description of why you would use an MCP tool without pulling that entire context, that entire JSON RPC space in, and then use it selectively, and then make use of it via a markdown definition, how to make effective calls, and then more importantly, how to get a response set that is reasonably sized so it doesn't blow out your context window. So I think I talked a little too much there, but it was good fun.
So, John, does that mean you have to redo everything that you've been doing in MCP for the past couple of months?
Well, I would say most people that you're either leveraging an MCP server from a third-party provider or integrator. So no, but hopefully what that means is that if MCP starts to evolve or goes to the wayside for another tool, that that it'll be hopefully seamless for anyone using the actual products, and that they decide to move towards this skill-based kind of discovery. I look at MCP, kind of what Jeremy said. I look at a lot of it like as a discovery protocol. It's entirely based on what does the language model have available to it to answer the questions for this particular conversation that's happening, right? And one of the first things that kind of stood out, Jeremy said USB is about as secure as USB. MCP itself grew out of very, very fast, and there wasn't a lot of role-based access control built into it. In fact, that was something that had to be added later. And it's also one of the harder things to get right? Anything with access control, especially when you're dealing with multiple service providers, making sure that your access is the same as you would need it through all service providers, rather than giving an invalid answer. You would want to give, hey, by the way, you might not have given me access to fully answer this question, which I haven't seen any MCP provider actually provide that. Rather, it would just simply give you an error. So there's a lot of nuances around how MCP works, specifically with every service, that is very opaque to the user, because you're kind of just relying on the service to operate the way it does when you use it through a web browser or another application, and that's simply not how a lot of these are built.
Gotcha. So Jeremy, you mentioned.
And I want to mention something. There's a hidden part of the MCP protocol. It's not hidden, but nobody uses it effectively. And I think it's the more interesting part, is that MCP's got a discovery protocol. As part of that discovery protocol, it will return back the functions that it can return, but it can also return back prompts, so that you can dynamically, from the server side, give it a prompt based on what it's asking. And that allows you to change the context by making sure that when it's asking a question. So there's some interesting research being done by Cloudflare, us, and a couple others, that during that prompt request, that it says, like, show me the other tools that I don't know I have access to. So that you're reducing the space of what's available at first, but you're giving it a prompt that says, well, you can always ask a general connection of this MCP, and we can see if we can discover some more. And what we are finding is some older models get confused. The newer models don't, and they'll be happy to go, oh, wait, there's more that I can do, and we'll ask and explore that. But once again, prompt and context explosion is a big problem.
So you mentioned this, and you kind of alluded to it here again, too, the older versus newer. I mean, based on what you're saying, older being like from like 3 months ago kind of thing, and newer being like last week, or because this thing changes so quickly. What kind of context you got for this?
So for the last 6 months, since MCP started taking off, that they've been tuning models or the found to specifically for tool calling. So reinforcement learning aspects of the final training session of modern models, actually they emphasize the use of tools relatively effectively. And they train them and they push them to ask tools to get more up-to-date information, to supplement their system in context and those things. So you're seeing an entire development model inside of the foundation, what are the foundational models? Yeah, foundation models, where they're pushing them to be tool calling first. But the more interesting things I've been seeing is some of the smaller Llama functions, like taking these open source models and making them really tight at using tools, so that they don't think a lot. They use a tool, and that loop is really, really tight and effective. And you're seeing that training model to make them more effective. So yeah, it's interesting. The general purpose GPT model 5 was horrible at tool calling. Codex, their sub-module from OpenAI, is extremely good at tool calling. It's their code first one, and it makes extensive use of command line tools, and it's really effective at using a tool to supplement what it knows.
So going down that path, as we become more agentic in nature in terms of the companies that are building these agents and they're building them on multiple platforms, MCP, kind of like DNS, I mean, it had its, great early start, then people found all kinds of vulnerabilities that got patched over time. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but it's something that everybody uses by just typing in their browser and magic happens behind the scenes. Are we going to see something similar with MCP, where not perfect right now, but it's kind of as good as we're going to get in terms of this kind of generation? Or are we just patching something right now, looking for the next major kind of interconnect?
That's a hard one. I think DNS was around for a while. And
Yeah,
it still
well,
is,
things are moving
obviously.
at light speed now, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I do think there's a decent analog to looking at DNS as something that is similar to this, but it's actually I think it's much more than just DNS, because it actually encompasses the protocol for actually calling the tool itself. So it's more, Jeremy said, it's more like an RPC. And in that regard, when you look at kind of RPC frameworks, you generally talk about, okay, well, how do you know that you're making a well-formatted request and response? And unfortunately, the way that a lot of language models to call these tools, they don't know the request and response format until you actually call the tool during the session, right? Because you could be adding, an MCP server provider that hasn't been seen before, right? It could be a custom one that you built. It could be one that another provider or a second party has built, and it's very difficult because, bar the few requests themselves, like tools, resource prompts, etc. in MCP, those are all standard, but the actual responses back are the things that you're like, okay, well, I don't know what the payload is in this thing. That's the part of the payload that, to what Jeremy was saying, is 29K, which is quite large. And that's only a single call, right? So having to, what you're basically trying to do is join a whole bunch of data sets or data live from a schema that you're also analyzing live. So in order to know what you're looking at, you also have to have the schema, what the schema means and how it maps to the data. So the problem itself is large. Until you see a standard way to start to represent kind of the result sets, which you could point to any number of protocols like GraphQL or anything, that might make this better, because now you're kind of scoping it down to the response itself being in a standard format. I think you're gonna continue to have these large kind of responses that could blow your context.
And I want to build on that, John. I think you're bumping into actually where the research is going and something that we're heading towards, which is I'm trying to remove MCP as fast as I can from all my tooling. What I've done is I've supplemented code execution. So I now don't expect MCP. I expect the tool to build using TypeScript and API real time, because the models are good enough now that I can sit there and tell it to, I need to call GitHub. I have credentials in my secret store. You have permission to access them. Go get a OAuth token, create it, call it, run it, and get this data. And I only want you to get data 1, 2, 3, and 4, because that's all you need. Instead of having this predefined software that's out there, that's MCP, that's hooked up and wired together, I do that. Guess what? It works. And guess what? If I use it from my computer, the first thing it does is, why am I writing code? I can use GH, the command line tool. So we'll do a brew install, run GH command line, and go do it that way. So I think MCP is great for certain particular use cases, but I think the innovation and where people are heading faster is, it's really good if it takes tools that people already know, code, command line tools, and has an environment to run them, that it can do even more. But this is going to make that whole security authorization problem even tougher, because now people are going to start putting in passwords and prompts directly into the chat window,
or skills,
or skills, or share them. Like, I set up SOPs. Like, how many people, John, do you think know about SOPs to manage credentials for your command line session? Not many. But I guarantee you, people will be happy to put credentials in there, and it will happy to use them. It'll be effective, and then they'll try to share that with somebody else. And that's going to be bad. So I think there's a lot of research, a lot of stuff to do. It's going to come back down to security, governance, and control again. I don't think MCP is going to be the end all be all, but I do think security, control, and governance are going to be the defining things of all of this.
Yeah, I tend to agree. You've got even more complicated is when you have a standardized orchestration that you set up to, accomplish a particular task. But then, as we've seen with a bunch of these others, I have an agent that's going to call another agent that's going to use another set of agents. How deep does that hole go before it's just a mess of stuff coming back? Well,
and what we're seeing is errors compound. So I am in complete disagreement with agents calling agents right now. I am 100%, and the agents will ask for the orchestrator for the response from another agent, because I need to make sure that other agent was well-defined, had a good structure, good output, because otherwise errors just propagate through prompts. That is just brutal. But there's a simple thing, which I got to get this out in every conversation I have. I can't help myself. We talked about MCP, but we didn't talk about A2A. And I'm going to be Jeremy as my podcast self. It is a unmitigated mistake of a protocol that Google designed that is going to be, if anybody adopts it, we are screwed. If anybody doesn't know what A2A is, it allows you to make your MCP RPC services available to across the internet and self-discoverable via DNS domain names. So this means that typos inside of your prompt, typo squatting by humans, is now an effective message for you to call an RPC system that somebody else controls. Nothing bad has ever happened with that.
No, my goodness. Well, you're making a good point across, broadly speaking, that the security and the governance that we're expecting good, well-defined and well-behaved software to follow is still kind of Wild West at the moment when we start talking about agents. So when we start looking at some of the broader requirements, the EU requirements, and other states that have required specific governance controls, how can an organization be sure that they're actually following them if in fact they're calling unknown or discoverable kinds of things?
It's the same old thing that's through all of history. Define everything that goes in, everything that comes out. So I think John's been involved in some of this. It's about how you add guardrails on top of things. Is you have to know everything that goes in. You have to record it. You have to make sure that you know what was recorded. Keep a hash of it. I'm not going to say the dreaded blockchain word, but it should tie together. And then you watch what goes out the network. Then you watch what comes back. And you record every single step where there was any mutation at any point in time. Because that you have to have the full chain of custody of all the requests of all the data. And then from there, you can meet the requirements. Now, you can't stop people from being people, which is they are going to ask the system incorrectly things. They're going to ask it to do things. You need, as an organization, to be able to detect those, report on them, log them, and show how it was used. And so this includes creating and using a identifier through the entire life cycle, so that as the chatbot you're having a long conversation with a chatbot, or it's part of an agent, part of a larger system, each one of those needs to be individually identifiable. They need to be based in the context of which it was used, so that you can always make sure you have a full audit log. This is the bare minimum. It's the same for all technology, for all of history. People aren't learning it again. Feels like once again with AI, we're relearning 40 years of history all over again of computer science.
Okay, well, you actually bring up a really good point, and I want to kind of make this, we talk about this next question. So you've learned that over the past amount of time of coding and being very deeply in it. John, you've learned it as you've been deep into technology. But now we have this really strange vibe coding moment now where anybody and their brother can write some code. It may or may not work. Google Gemini Enterprise is really pushing this, hey, employees, build your AI agents without writing any code. How do you see this playing out in regulated, just in any world, but I guess it's even more compounded when we talk about finance or other kind of regulated environments where they don't understand this. They've not been through the same kind of rigor and mistakes that we've made over the past couple decades.
Yeah, that's an interesting how to answer that one. No, I think that the thing about that question in particular, it opens up a lot, right? So let's start first with the how do you what Jeremy said, how can you actually audit the conversation that a user's happening, or the workflow that an agent is actually executing. And the only way to do that to start is to have a unique identifier that will trace through the requests that are being executed both by the language model, by the agent, if there's a compute aspect to it, and then potentially, further down the chain, if there's more agents, processes, or language models involved in the whole kind of thing. And it gets back to what I would say is most systems that have been built in the finance and the healthcare, the insurance space, is data provenance, right? The ability to see, let's separate AI for a second, but you need to know where the data comes from. If it's a drop from an SFTP, if it's an API call, if it's a database that you're transferring from your application, you need to know where the source of the data comes from, how it's actually being transformed, what's actually what rules are being applied, what's being filtered, what's being added, enriched, and then ultimately you're presenting a view to either another agent, another database, process, application, etc. That's a solved problem, generally speaking, because most systems that application developers and teams build are usually within your own walls. You don't have to necessarily go out and be concerned about a third-party integration. And if you do, you have touch points on how that integration is actually managed. The difference here now is, first, you're not making a decision on when to go out. I mean, you are by giving a list of tools, but you're not really making the decision about how and when those tools are used. And more importantly, if you're integrating with third-party providers, we use GitHub as an example here, but it could be LinkedIn, it could be 15 other services. I think PayPal even has a MCP server now. Now you have to rely on both the provider that's giving you the data, right? That they're doing everything that you would expect. You have to rely on your own agentic processes. And then you have to guardrail the user to make sure that, first of all, they understand that that the agentic process or the conversation is orchestrating a lot of these things on behalf of the user. Because I think that's a key thing here, is it's not an AI tool that's really doing the work here. There's a reason behind it, and it's most of the time invoked by a user or an administrator or someone that's trying to achieve a result. And the hardest thing in that whole procedure is to make sure the person that's running the command or responsible to make the decision actually knows what they're making an action on, right? Does it mean that my data might go outside of a region? Am I pulling in data that maybe hasn't been cleansed up to my standards? Is there a immutable process that's now being made to a data store that I'm not aware of? You really don't know. And that's the hard part right now with these tools, is that you're relying on third party and potentially, more parties down the line to do the right thing. And as we know, the right thing might mean different things to different parties involved.
We just given users scissors and time to go run, and then
we're giving them a shotgun.
Traffic.
We're giving them a shotgun and expecting them not to have any training and know what to do with it. So as much as I want to be negative at this, I actually think that the code generation is the safe choice. I think that you should be using code generation from these tools faster and more often, rather than just having the tool in the process all the time. Because the tool is the LLM is non-deterministic. It changes. Its context is extremely susceptible to minor changes, swinging massive outcome changes. But if you take that expertise and have them codify their expertise and they run it as code, and they can test it, they can do that. They can ask it to build use cases, define inputs and outputs. These are all things that any person can do with a modern LLM to get to an extremely predictable system that can then be run on their behalf. And so, as much as possible, I predict more code will be produced going forward, and we'll get more trust in that, because that's the way we're going to interact with these tools to get to outcomes. Because here's the second benefit of that. is that once it's in Git, I now know what's going to happen. And that means that the regulation can go away. They say like, oh, this subject matter expert codified this in this tool, and now I can review it. I can explain it, and I can say, it's not the non-deterministic, it's deterministic.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jeremy said, except towards the end there. I think to elaborate a little bit more, it is deterministic. The code itself is deterministic, but the code, the process might not be deterministic based on the data that you're feeding into it.
Of course.
But I think that's the key point here, because ultimately, what does this mean? I agree that, we're talking about in the future now, probably more lines of code written by language models, AI, than humans. Absolutely. You're going to have more, which result means that there's going to be more code written by AI in the future than, humans, right? Now, we need to focus the human aspect, the people running and responsible for reviewing this. They need to know how to troubleshoot, and they need to know how to understand the software that's being generated from prompting and from specifications and the data that goes into this, now even more than ever. And I think, the progression from a entry-level junior software developer through a senior level architect, distinguished engineer, very much follows the similar path. You can churn code out all day long as a junior developer, but if you don't know what it's doing, it's not really that useful. I mean, it might be useful for certain edge cases and it solves a problem, but when you get to a place where you need to get more mileage on the software, you need to integrate it with a third party, you need to add different data that has a slightly different validation rule set behind it. Now you start to realize, oh, maybe I didn't design that correctly. Or maybe the software that generated my code now needs to be regenerated with this new type of data model. And if you're a junior developer, you wouldn't know that because you never went through that process of learning. So
I have a story to tell on this. I want to talk about this when you're done. Because my product team goes like, you vibe coded this, Jeremy. How dare you tell us that it's usable? I go, good. Did you open it up? And it was 6,000 lines of TypeScript with close to 50,000 lines of tests. Because I wrote the vibe coded it, and then I went through and I used my 25 years of history of going through every use case. Going, let's go build a unit test for this. Unit test for this. And like, mind you me, there's more tests in that code base than I probably ever produced by hand in my entire life. It has got so many corner cases. It's got so many things. It's fully integrated. I would never have written that many tests, but that test suite finds problems that my original vibe coded never would have thought of, because I was systematically going through and going like, no, I want to trust this, but I can do it, use those tools in a different way to get to a different outcome. And that's where the experience really speaks to it.
And the journey, like I was mentioning earlier, the journey from a junior engineer to a senior engineer follows the same path, right? You sometimes, hopefully you have a mentor that's working with you that is, that's able to sit down and tell you, like, this is the right way within the framework or whatever you're building is the right way to build code, to commit it, to release it to production. And all that can be codified into a specification or a document to tell a language model. But where it can't is when after you generate that code, after the language model generates the code, it's not there anymore. Like, the code is its own artifact that is now running independently. There is probably a market for, hey, I have a vibe coded piece of software, language model, go analyze that and tell me where it's broken, which will be interesting to see, like, but the point is that ultimately when you're in the middle of a troubleshooting issue, or when you're adding a new feature, you not only need to now know the history of the code of the data model, but you need to know what tooling was used to build this thing, because there very well might be edge cases that you're not aware of in the model that was built that's now causing potential downstream impacts. So again, back to the how we as a profession start to use these tools. I think what Jeremy said, using these tools to build unit tests is absolutely the first step you should be doing. I mean, the first step should be document this code base for me and tell me what it is. But after that step, it should be, analyze my unit test suite. Does it have adequate coverage? What coverage would you add? And then let the junior developer and potentially mentor senior developer walk through it to understand why it's actually suggesting those changes.
Gotcha. So this leads me to think in terms of, so the process that you guys have been talking about has been from an engineering, a coding perspective. But as we've been talking within the broader realm of the world here, and the whole agent thing and the no code, low code, anybody can do this, bring your accountant along with, and he can be the next vibe coder, make all this stuff happen. They're missing a lot of that experience that you're talking about. So they are by default junior coders or even pre-junior coders. And I would say, based on the way that I'm sure you guys have seen it yourself, most organizations have countless numbers of Excel spreadsheets that have varying levels of expertise built into them, that it's got to terrify you to think that these are the same people that could come along and start dropping agents, right? So
Yes and no, but I think the same thing about software development people. Like as they come in, like it's a distribution. Some are going to be great, some are not. I think that the part that's interesting is how easy it's going to be to make your system better too. And so, like, that's the example. I gave you a software development example, but it means for a business development or BI example is I made a mistake. I can go add an unbelievable amount of unit tests, checks, conformity, just as easy to make sure that I don't end up in that bad state. And that's the part that people need to start going is like, hey, I can go do something fast and now, but if I want it to be durable, it has to be durable. And that's the same truth as an Excel spreadsheet. It's the same truth as anything I produce.
So OpenAI has been, envisioning this world with millions of cloud-based AI agents supervised by people. And first of all, thinking through that, how realistic do you think that is? And are financial institutions and other regulated industries ready for something along those lines yet?
Is that me?
I'm going to let you go because I answer every question by default in this world. That's just who I am.
To answer the question, I don't think that the world's ready to be managing thousands of agents, autonomous agents, in an organization. The answer is no. No one's ready for that yet. But the interesting part about everything that's happening now is that it's kind of a moment where people are seeing the potential in a tool and trying to fit it in different use cases that would cause would provide the best outcomes, more efficient outcomes for their customers. Right? And that's that's most product development. The hard part though is the carrot feeding of a system, right? It's very easy to get something to do something once. It's easy to get a human to do something once. It's easy to get, a child or a dog to do something once, but to get it predictable multiple times, and then more importantly, have a run book or actions on how to fix those issues when they're happening thousands or hundreds of thousands of times in a day, that's a lot harder. I have yet to see something that's doing that much inference, AI inference, other than a chat system itself, right? Like those systems, but even then they're at such a high level. You're really just looking at are the individual components operating correctly? Not what are the components doing and are they doing those correctly? So I think there's a lot, there's a lot around compliance and guardrails that needs to be invested in specifically for healthcare, financial services. Most of that is going to be, I would say, on the orchestration side, but a lot of it's going to be the auditing side too. And that's the truth is typically you have the audit's a different arm from the people doing the work. And I think right now it's very difficult. Even if you ask an auditor, how do you audit this, right? How do you audit the software? How do you audit the processes? Just like with a traditional RPA tool, you can look at what it does. You can look at the instructions to what it does. The difference between a traditional RPA tool and this, though, is that it's non-deterministic. So now you got to fit rules and measures around how it performs and what's the threshold of performing correctly or not.
And on the care and feeding, we've seen this in almost every time there's been an automation boom and productivity boom, is that the reduction in workforce is too fast for the capabilities being done. So if you can get it down to 5 people, you should not go to 5 people. Because guess what? The care and feeding, the corner cases, the use cases over time will still need 10. We do a really, really bad job of knowing what's coming out in the future. So if you are becoming more efficient using these tools, you're buying efficiency, and you think it's only 5, you probably need 10. If you think it's 10, you probably need 20. Because the corner cases are going to show up at any point in time in the future. The bathtub diagram of software development lifecycle is going away. It's going to be a normal distribution. Where, if everybody's not familiar, you know it, but I'll be explicit. When you're software design, the bugs are all in the first release, and as it times out in time, it grows. It's that bathtub at the bottom where you get just running normal kind of errors. I don't think that's going to stay this way. I think it's going to change. I think because there's going to be so much more code that paradigm is going to be pretty flat for the rest of time.
You know, I think I just on that part, I do think that it'll be the interesting part, which vibe coding hasn't really made apparent yet, is what's the development life cycle of a product that was vibe coded, and I mean, because here's the realistic part. Like, if you're in a ticketing system and you're describing a bug to an engineer today, there's generally a little bit of back and forth. There's some attached document or screenshots, maybe some data that comes along with the issue, and you're explaining the issue, the problem. There's no reason why that can't be immediately have an agent go away and try to fix the bug without a user actually, or an engineer actually starting initiating that process. In fact, that's probably the easiest. That's probably the easiest way to add more velocity to an existing application now without vibe coding it, right? Now here's the problem.
I'm going to have fun with that because I got a security mindset.
Okay, well, let's put security aside. The biggest problem is how do you know what they're doing is correct? And who's the person that actually reviews that at the end and signs off on it, right? Because typically the engineer is the expert. They're signing off on it implicitly. And then you have a 4 eyes principle. You have a code review. Someone else signs off on it. And then you generally have business product acceptance criteria, which, might be different depending on the problem, the domain, the customer. You're now adding multiple non-deterministic things here. Is it any better or worse than the current software development lifecycle? I don't know. In fact, it might be better. But we won't know. You're shaking your head. But the answer is, like, is it better to not do it and wait, have it sit in the backlog, maybe be months before you attack it, or just vibe code it and see if it works?
Before you go, for everyone who's listening to this podcast, you are missing out on all of the nonverbal cues.
Yeah, Jeremy's just trying to jump in.
Yeah. He says, "Go ahead, Jeremy."
I try. I'm used to. Yeah. I want to know that everybody would do that, because if you sign up, your bug ticket system is now the single largest avenue to attack the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and I guarantee now that you mentioned it, if anybody wants to go have fun for a DEF CON, I guarantee you can go see the customers that have automated agent development, that you can probably get tickets pushed into them and get them to reveal horrible things into that.
Absolutely, especially if you use like white text in an image, right? That it's, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to worry about here. And honestly, I have no idea if there's anyone doing this yet. In fact, like I think that is actually probably the best way to start to dip your toe into seeing what it produces. Now, the question is, how do you validate it? And how do you make sure that there's not prompt injection or SQL injection or like point in time issues with the data, right? Because what if one of the MCP servers is down, you get the wrong answer. You're never going to know that, right? Because you don't correlate those two things together. So again, a lot of this comes now back to operations and how do you manage the operations, not only of the language models, but your organization.
Okay, last question for you guys. We talked about vibe coding. We talked about all these things, the regulations that we were involved with, the governance that's required and whatnot. Across the world, we have a varying number of geographies that have put in strict or not so strict or non-existent sorts of governance plays that they're requiring for the AI systems that are being used in those areas. So as these emerge across the various regions, each one with their own priorities and whatnot, are we entering an era where innovation is gated by geography?
I think we're already in that era, to be honest.
I mean, we've certainly seen it with the EU and the United States, for example, because I would say there's one that's more strict and one that's less strict. Do you think this is going to continue, or do you think there's going to be some sort of happy median?
Jeremy, you want to?
No, go, because
No.
I'm thinking of this one.
I think the answer is at the high level. So if you just look at the definition of the question, is innovation gated geographically? I think the answer today is yes, right? For a variety of reasons, regulation being one of them. I think access to compute, access to schooling, access to other individuals to work with alongside them, because a lot of development comes from learning from other people and seeing what they do. I absolutely think that your location depends. I think that this actually lowers the barrier for entry, though. I think that over time, as the language models themselves, as the compute devices get smaller and less, you can fit them in a laptop. I imagine the next 10 years, you will have a laptop that can do what we're doing now remotely, locally, right? When that happens, I think that the barrier for entry goes a lot lower. And now it becomes...
Well, you mentioned one thing too. So I think this is probably something to key in on, is while there's technological issues, and we've certainly seen that just given the amount of GPUs organizations are throwing at stuff. But I think the one that I wanted to key on was the personnel side of things. It's one thing to say, listen, this is democratized, right? You can, if you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you have a connection through your LTE connection over some whatever to your horrible laptop, you can still get access to ChatGPT and do something, right? You can still vibe code yourself into something. But the idea is you could do that if you even knew about it. You knew how to do it. You had someone to guide you. So this comes back to that what you mentioned before, is do we have someone to help guide folks to be able to do that? Today, I'd say that, especially with the blistering speed we're seeing, everything moving right now, maybe. I mean, certainly we're in environments where we're kind of used to this, right? And I'm sure you talk to folks who are in our industry and we talk with them about their kids. Their kids are learning this stuff just because mom and dad are like really, making sure they understand what new world they're getting into. But folks who don't even see that, here that in the United States, go into the Appalachian range and find some towns that are in there that are not doing so well. They're coal mining towns. Again, not sub-Saharan Africa, but they still don't have people that can teach them or to give them what's kind of your guidance on that kind of thing? Where do you see that going?
Listen, I think actually, I think pre-AI era, there's been a lot of investment in code schools and things to teach individuals the skills that they need to change their career and start to be software developers. I think we've seen just in the last 10 years alone that explode, right? You'll see these every once in a while come up on television, on YouTube or whatever you're watching. It'll be a very much I don't want to say one of those diploma mills of like 15 years ago, but there are some really good ones, and the best ones have their lessons and things like that are completely online and available for you to audit, right? Audit as a lesson. You can see what it will actually provide you. Access for me, when I think about sociological differences, it boils down to do you have the means to actually sit down and spend the time to learn, right?
That's it.
And that is where I think the barrier is going to be. So folks in the coal mining towns, they probably have more time than folks in the Sahara Desert. just me guessing, but not as much time as someone like Jeremy or myself, who are thought leaders who are in this every single day. So it boils down to, the access, but more so like, do you have the actual time to spend to think through these problems? Because I think most people, they see these tools and they're just like, these are really easy. They don't understand the complexity behind going from start to finish to actually getting it to a customer. And the complexity isn't just prompting the tool to do what you want it to do. It's getting it from that point to in the hands of a new customer or new user.
The paper that set all of LLMs forward from 2017 was "Attention is all that matters." And that is the single most important paper in the last 10 years that basically locks the GPTs and making them focus. And the same thing goes, to answer your question, the same thing is for people. It's where they spend their time. And if you spend your time using these tools, you will be better than 90% of the people, everybody that doesn't. And if you spend time to really utilize and maximize them, they'll be better than everybody else that doesn't. It will come down to your ability to spend time, explore, and refine, and become a master. I use these tools extensively to do that. I'm teaching my kids not just how to use AI correctly. Don't ask it for an answer. Ask it to help you with your answer. But how to explore with it, utilize it, try it out, try things. Know that models behave differently. It's going to be, attention is all that matters.
Okay, last question for you guys. Where do you see, and I'm going to limit it to up through the spring of next year, where do you see the current generation of LLMs transitioning or moving forward by next spring? What most excites you about whatever that is?
I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, I'll go first this time. I think that we are finding that the foundational models out of Anthropic and OpenAI are going to continue to be the best. But I think China's ability to share information and work together on less hardware means that they have a real advantage as a whole. Because their motive, I don't know if anybody knows about the AI Wikipedia that they've created in China. It is the differentiator going along before. It is this, every single company contributes to it. It must be in Chinese native. You must be speaking in that. And it is massive. It is bigger than Wikipedia now. It is used more often and it has more information and everybody's sharing. And that is an extremely hard thing to overcome. That many people coming together around a common cause because they have selected that they have to win. And this wasn't even the government that chose this. This was the nerds deciding they had to win the AI race, even whether they had the better hardware or not. And that is something that I think we have to pay deep attention to. That's not the geopolitical. That is the sharing of information is what makes people better. And I don't think anybody's doing it better than they are. And their models are getting better with less resources by being scrappy. So I think in the next 12 months, they are the ones to continue to watch.
I actually don't know a lot about the thing that Jeremy just referenced, but I think in the same regard, I actually think the models themselves are less of what needs to get better, and the inference needs to get better on local devices. And that might be a mix of the models getting better, more scrappy, but still accurate. Like there could be a whole bunch of ways you could argue that. But as the models themselves, the inference gets better locally, then you start to open up new avenues of like your own personal assistant that can start. I did a whole bunch of things for a vacation that I'm taking soon. And I had to make phone calls. I had to add appointments into my calendar, my wife's calendar. I had to add appointments into my family's calendars. They're going to help watch the children. It would be great if I could just say, hey, I'm busy at work. Please go schedule this for me. Here's my requirements, and then walk away. That could obviously happen with a model that is running in the meat space in the cloud. But like ideally, I would want that to happen on my device with all my personal context, and I don't want that personal context to be available to every cloud provider that it touches. So I think it's a mix of these models being more efficient and more purpose driven for what we're trying to use it for, and as the models get more efficient and they could fit on local devices, you're going to start to see more of a boom in my opinion.
Interesting concepts there. And gentlemen, I really appreciate you joining me today for all this information and your insights. And we'll definitely do this again, say, at the beginning of the year. We'll kind of regroup and see what you guys have in store for us and your thoughts.
Checkpoint.
Exactly, a few months from now and see how things go. So thanks again. I really appreciate you joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.